guys, welcome back. It's Josh with the Financial Advisor Car Guy. So this week we're going to talk about what you probably all are expecting me to talk about, and that is tariffs in the automotive industry. So this is a topic that's literally a mile long. We could talk on this for hours. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take some real highlights and high points and just kind of lay them out there for you guys and give you an opportunity to think about some of this stuff. And then I'll ask you to just comment down below and let me know your thoughts if you kind of agree or disagree or think I'm crazy. I don't know. But, basically, as you're probably all aware, this week, the market has been an absolute mess. In the last 4 trading days, the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ are both down 13%, and the Dow Jones is down about 11%. And that's in 4 days, 4 trading sessions. So year to date, it's different than that, but that is truly what it's been in the last week. And the only reason I know that is because my assistant's been out of town, and so I've been doing all this work by myself, which is fine, but it's created a lot more phone calls, and the phone's been ringing, and emails, and people stopping in the office. And when I'm by myself, there's only one of me. So it's been kind of a hectic week, but nonetheless, here we are. So when it comes to tariffs, conceptually, it's an added cost to import or export, and primarily import. And so what is interesting about all this is companies that are maybe more domestically structured, where they're going to build their cars here in the States, they're not as at risk. When you think about, the European cars, you think of the Mercedes, the Volkswagen Group, BMW, a lot of those guys. And they own everybody, right? Like the Volkswagen Group is huge. You think about Lamborghini, Porsche, Bugatti, some of these really high-end cars, as well as the standard Volkswagen lineup. But we'll get into that in a moment. Realistically, car companies that are domestic are poised for a little bit better success, but the concern is parts come from international sources. So I'll start by telling you that I think we're going to have kind of a weird phenomenon similar to that of COVID. So remember COVID, car prices went through the roof, used car prices primarily. I think we're going to see some of that again, maybe not to the same extent. So I've got a buddy of mine who's a sales guy. He was telling me he was on his route dealing with one of his customers, and he came across another guy who sells Ford trucks, F-350s and up, or 450s and up. And these are the big commercial duty trucks. Well, apparently there's a lot in California that has literally 100 of these trucks sitting on it, and they are not being sold. So what does that mean, right? They're asking something for these trucks. They're not selling. Ultimately, they're going to have to ask less or take less to unload some of the inventory. But on the flip side, they're probably not going to have a ton of inventory coming, right? So on a more local level, I was dealing with a client earlier in the week, and he was telling me he wanted to take a distribution because he is paying cash for a travel trailer. And it's a brand new travel trailer, 2025, all the bells and whistles, fully loaded. It's a small trailer. It's less than 20 feet. It's like 19 feet. You add the bumper and the tongue, and it's 22.5 or something, 22.6 from end to end. And a relatively small trailer, but the MSRP was $49.5, which is absolutely absurd. So he went in there, started chatting with the sales guy, was able to beat him up a little bit, ended up walking out of there truly paying $29,999. Yeah, $19,500, almost $20,000 off the asking price. That's an incredible deal. I mean, really, right? Going from 50 to 30. That's huge, 40% off. So all that tells us is that inventory is sitting and it needs to move. And we're in a position right now where, because of crazy markets, because of political changes this year, because of interest rate changes, there's a million different reasons, but people maybe are hanging onto their cash a little tighter and not spending it on more frivolous things like they were 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago when money was cheap, money was easy to get. It was just one of those things. And so here we are now, not in a global pandemic, but we're in a different scenario. So during the pandemic, if you remember, there were little like chips and processors and things that auto manufacturers needed to put their cars together so the electronics work. Everything in these cars is electronic. And without those parts, they couldn't build the new cars. So we saw record low inventory on new car lots and record high prices for used cars, and people were buying, right? It wasn't because they felt like they had to, but people that did need new cars were willing to spend a premium because that was all there was. So fast forward to today, and companies like Audi, BMW, Mercedes, a lot of these guys have straight up said, Volkswagen, not Volkswagen, but the Audi group, Lamborghini, and there was another one or two I saw this morning, but they've already said, we're gonna stop exporting to the United States for the time being. Now, what that means is if I were to go down to the Audi dealer, and there's one 20 miles away, if I walked onto their floor, their showroom floor, and they've got whatever they've got, they're probably asking a little bit of a premium for it right now because they're not going to be able to replace it. So they need to capture as much money as they can because who knows when the next inventory will show up. The last thing they want, and maybe it's not the last thing they want, but one thing they don't want to see happen is them to sell every car they have, and then they have to essentially close the doors because they can't conduct business without inventory. And there's no inventory coming. So it is kind of a problem. Then you look at my buddy in the Ford situation, right? Ford built all these trucks that aren't selling, but is it because they're not selling for a purpose, or are businesses just waiting to see what happens with tariffs, or, what's the scenario there? So it's kind of interesting because on one hand, you have things like these Ford trucks and these travel trailers that now all of a sudden the dealers have to offer them for well below MSRP just to unload them. But then on the flip side, you have kind of the opposite problem with some of these international companies. And, if they're built, let's talk about Mazda or Toyota or, whatever. If these cars aren't built here in the States, even if they're built in Mexico, they have to import them back to the States. And there's going to be a tax on that, a tariff. And that's going to get passed on to the consumer one way or the other. So now all of a sudden, a brand new, Dodge Ram truck might not be as attractive as, say, a Tesla Cybertruck. Weird, right? Who knows? I don't know. And I'm not saying that's a thing. But then there's the whole situation with Tesla. And we'll get into that here in a moment. But I'm going to show you guys, and I'm going to put this up on the screen, but just so you see, I've got this chart here. It truly is how tariffs will affect U.S. automakers, okay? So it tells us on this chart what the average tariff cost is per vehicle. Per vehicle, okay? It doesn't matter if it's a Ford Taurus or an F-150, right? Ford is gonna add this tariff to every vehicle. So I'll start on the low end, the very top one there, Tesla. Tesla is made here in the United States from start to finish. The tariff on a Tesla, $1,627. That's very insignificant on a car that's 50, 60, 70, 80, 90,000 or $100,000. Right? You're talking 1.5% on a $100,000 car. It's very, very minimal. That's not going to impact, it's not going to make someone not buy. And in fact, a guy like Elon Musk may actually reduce the MSRP by what the tariff cost is just to continue to sell vehicles, right? You never know. On the flip side of that, we come down to the bottom, Tata Motors. Well, Tata isn't really a presence here in the United States. Geely, not really a presence here in the United States. Mercedes. Now, Mercedes might strike a chord with some of you viewers. I don't know. But Mercedes builds a really nice car, and they're a premium. They're expensive. So now, to buy a Mercedes, you're going to have to pay a $9,056 tariff on that purchase. So if you're buying a G-Wagon, or you're buying an AMG, whatever, S500, or you know what I mean, one of these high-end cars that's already $150,000, $200,000, now you got to pay an additional $10,000 or $9,000 and change on top of that. You may consider some different alternatives, or you might look to used. Right under Mercedes is Volkswagen, right? So Volkswagen is a problem because not only can you buy a $25,000 Golf but you can buy $1 million Bugatti all under the, VW Group header. So all of a sudden, VW's base model cars or less expensive cars are not very attractive when you have to pay almost $9,000 in tariffs. I mean, that can be 20 or 30% of the asking price of that car, again, on top in a tariff. Next is BMW. So same thing, another luxury automaker from Europe, builds a nice car. If I ever, I'd love an M5, and I think we've talked about that on the page. I'm not about to spend an additional $8,000 on a tariff. I'll go buy a used one. Above BMW, we have Mazda, then Stellantis, and we'll stop at Stellantis for a minute. That's, essentially Dodge, Jeep, right? If I want to go buy a new Wrangler, I'm going to pay almost $5,000 in tariffs. And Hyundai, that's going to include Kia. General Motors, right? That's kind of a big one, $4,500 and change. That includes the Hummer lineup. That's Cadillac, General Motors, GMC, and Chevrolet. And that, again, same thing. You want to buy an inexpensive car, commuter car, or a small EV. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to pay an extra $4,500. Not cool. Toyota, then Nissan, then Subaru, and then Ford. And by the time you get to Ford, you're looking at just under $3,000 for a tariff. And even that's real significant money. If you buy a $50,000 or $60,000 Ford, $3,000, that's 5%, right? That's meaningful. It's not quite sales tax in some states, but it's meaningful. And I guess to that point, I live in Oregon. I have no sales tax. So if I buy a $100,000 car, it's $100,000, not $109,000 or whatever the sales tax would make it. So the tariff is that tax, right? So now all of a sudden you live in California where there's a 9% sales tax. You buy a $100,000 Mercedes, it's $109,000 plus now another $9,000. So you're effectively paying $18,000 or 18% interest, or not interest, in tax on top of the sales price. That's pretty crazy. Below Ford, you've got Rivian, Lucid, Honda, and Tesla. Now, Honda's the shocker for me. Now, Honda, I know, is built here. That's not a surprise. They're built here in the States. I would think that they would get a lot of their parts still from China, but apparently that's not the case. Apparently, they do it all here, and maybe they do their own machining and programming and all the stuff here. That one was a little bit of a shocker. Tesla prides themselves on being like the best truly built American car. I get that. Rivian's an American built car, Lucid here is in the States as well. So those are all, relatively low tariffed cars. Again, anywhere from $1,600 to about that $3,000 with Ford. But this tax is interesting because, ultimately the reason for a tariff is for future tax breaks. So the consumers pay this tax up front, or they do, but it's really the foreign country that's sending us their goods. They're paying the tax. And then really our plan with that tax is to invigorate our economy, right? That's more money coming into the economy, staying in our economy, building and flourishing our economy. But it's so challenging because people don't necessarily understand how it works. And the knee-jerk reaction is the economy's crashing. We need to get out of the market. We need to do all these things. And really, I would stop you and say, don't do that. That's not the right move. But staying, and that's a whole nother topic, right? The financial side of a tariff and the financial side of the market and all that stuff. Again, I want to keep this focused on automobiles. But I tell you all this stuff just to kind of circle back around to, is this COVID 2.0? Audi, if they're going to stop bringing cars to the States. Now, the R8's exempt from this whole rule because they don't make an R8 anymore, right? That's done. The R8 has passed. So you can only buy used R8s. But Audi in general, if someone has a brand new, like a 2024, 2025 A5, A6, A7, whatever it is, and I really want one, my dealership has none, I either fly somewhere, buy one, potentially pay sales tax, whatever it is, or I find a used one. And if that's the case, the used ones will hold their value, right? Used cars might actually go up, especially on some of these more high-end car companies. Now might be a great time to buy a used Mercedes before this really gets implemented. Or a used, I don't want to say Volkswagen, but a used Audi or Porsche or BMW or Lamborghini or whatever, Bugatti. Whatever it is inside that VW group, or again, the BMWs. Maybe now's a great time to buy. I don't know. Interest rates are probably going to come down. So, there's 1,000 different things to consider. You're going to pay a higher interest rate today than you might in a year. But in a year, you may not have a tariff. You may. I mean, it may pay to wait, I guess is really what I'm going with that. But I think that we're going to see some select cars, the used prices are going to go up or stay real strong. Other cars, California is funny because they're a unique environment there. They, essentially have banned diesel engines. So thinking about that Ford dealer that has 100 F-450s or bigger trucks sitting on their lot, those are all gas rigs. Well, California has this mandate, right? Their cars and vehicles all need to be electric, and I don't think that's been repealed or pulled back. So by 2034 or something like that, every car in California is supposed to be electric, and the grid can't handle that right now. They're working on it. But companies need these trucks today. Ford's built them, and they're sitting there ready to go. It's an interesting dilemma, and I don't know. I don't want to read into it too much, and I really don't know the reasoning behind why they're sitting there and not being sold. Maybe they're asking too much, or maybe companies truly just don't want to buy gas rigs. They want diesel or electric, and that's not what's offered, and who knows. But anyway, the world as we know it has been moving around, and I don't necessarily think that's going to change a whole lot. I really do think that the car market is due for a shakeup again. It's been 4.5, 5 years since COVID. And, we really saw some movers and shakers. We saw cars appreciate, used cars appreciate. I don't know that we're going to get back to that, but I definitely see things holding as they are. And new cars keep getting more expensive anyway. So even without tariffs, a brand new F-150, starts at 60 grand or whatever it is, real close to 60 grand. Whereas in 2011, when my pickup was brand new, my Raptor, fully loaded Raptor, was like 60 grand. That was the top of the line truck. You couldn't buy a more expensive Ford F-150 at that moment in time. But now today, like the base model is close to 60 grand. So things have gotten crazy, things are expensive, and interest is a lot higher today than it was back then. I could have bought that truck with nothing down, with no interest, or 1.99 or whatever it is. I could have done that. But in today's world, a used Raptor, even a $30,000 or $40,000 used pickup, I'm going to get a loan that's 5 or 6%, maybe more, 7 or 8% in some cases if I don't have good credit. So it's costing more to borrow these days, and values are staying strong and maybe even climbing. So we're in for a long ride. So now I ask, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think I'm so off base, I'm crazy, or do you see some of this happening in your area, right? Are there cars sitting on the lot? Are cars costing more money? Are things going the wrong way? We think the feds are going to cut rates in a couple of months, maybe once or twice this year. Could be a third time late in the year. Too early to tell. But we think the feds are going to cut rates a little bit. That will help spur the economy in a way that people may borrow again, right? I would tell you that the last 2 years, at least in my financial advising office, I've had more clients take cash out of their accounts to fund bigger purchases because they don't want to pay big interest rates. They don't. So if rates fall again and get to where I can go buy a car for 1.99 or 2.99, maybe I buy a new car and I finance it because I can leave my money invested and earn more than that 1.99 or 2.99. But if interest rates are 6 or 7 or 8% and the market's volatile, doesn't necessarily make sense one way or the other to leave it invested where you may not get 7 or 8%, but you also don't want to pay that 7 or 8%. So you just sell your investments and pay cash and not deal with it. Simple math, but that's why people work with advisors, and we run the numbers and we figure out what works and what doesn't, what makes sense and what doesn't. And it's not a one size fits all. What works for you might not work for me, and vice versa. So that's all I got for you guys this week. Like I said, comment down below and let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe, share this stuff, hit that notification bell, but most importantly, remember, may every investment you make be a good one. Till next time.